I'm Bouris and this is Straight Talk.
Well, Australians love this company.
Well, they did love this company.
Joe Aston, welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Mark, thanks for having me, and I'm glad I got the memo on the Bouris uniform.
But the pants, mate.
Well, you're shooting from the waist up,
yeah,
I hope.
Correct. No one can see that. You're right.
George Orwell said, this is one of my favourite quotes, "Journalism is publishing something that someone doesn't want to be published, and anything else is public relations." This book is about how Qantas influences all politicians, because this has been going on for 40 years. Qantas managed to rip $2.7 billion of subsidies out of the Morrison government after they convinced the Morrison government not to save Virgin Australia with a financial lifeline. They were the biggest recipient of JobKeeper, and then they illegally sacked people. Their power is immense, no matter who is in government.
Because I think it's important to establish Joe Aston, so I hope you don't mind me asking those sort of questions.
That just got worse and worse, and
Joe Aston, welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Mark, thanks for having me, and I'm glad I got the memo on the Bouris uniform.
But the pants, mate.
Well, you're shooting from the waist up,
yeah,
I hope.
Correct. No one can see that. You're right. Actually, mate, congratulations on your book. It's been I think it's a huge success. I mean, what does a huge success mean for you in relation to this book?
Well, look, for me, a huge success would be if the public finally understood exactly what Qantas had done to the country, to its customers, to its loyal customers, and it's the national carrier, of course. If that sunk in, if everyone understood exactly how big and intentional and how much of it, if that became clear to the public, I'd be very, very happy. That's sort of what I'm trying to do.
Of course, we're talking about today the book called The Chairman's Lounge, which I have to admit I am a member of, but I'm also in the Virgin VIP one too.
And you're also not a politician, so
I'm
we'll
definitely
forgive
not a
you.
politician. But I think what's important about this, we will talk and park it a little bit at the moment, but we will talk a little bit about the Albanese part and all this. But that's, to me, that's already been done to death. This is what you have underneath the heading is it says the inside story of how Qantas sold us out.
Yep.
And we've got lots of there's lots of well-known people like Adele Ferguson's, etc., and Kate Mclachlan who have read the book. I must have read it before publishing and have given it a big rap. Qantas sold us out. Qantas being our national carrier, Qantas being a monopoly in Australia, Virgin sort of competes them, but not really.
It's an effective monopoly.
Yeah. What was the objective, mate? You've taken yourself. You were retired effectively from the AFR, where you ran many, many years. We'll talk about this a bit later. The Rear Window, and you're great at. In fact, I think you're the best ever to ride in that area. Took a couple of years off, got married, had a couple of kids, or had a kid. Wrote this book. What's the deal?
So I didn't really plan to do. I really didn't plan to do it.
So you didn't stop working the AFR to write the book?
No. And in fact, when the publishers came to me with a book deal around the time that I was pulling the pin at the AFR last October, I just straight away said, absolutely no way. I didn't leave to do exactly what I've been doing for the previous 12 months, which is writing about Alan, Joyce and Qantas. But after a few weeks off, some people aren't very good at doing nothing. And although I had every intention of resting, and I went overseas, had a nice little break, but very quickly I was like, I need something, and it felt hard to be. What I then saw, I suppose, is Qantas trying to just PR wash the whole thing. Alan Joyce had gone, Vanessa Hudson had taken over. They just sort of tried to make out like nothing had happened, and I thought this all needs to be put in one place so the public can not be hoodwinked into thinking that this was all just a bit of an accident, a couple of small mistakes, and a bit of a PR storm that wasn't really based on anything. I thought, no, this has to all be done properly, because it's not like, Qantas didn't burn its loyalty. It didn't burn its reputation overnight. It wasn't a couple of decisions in the last 6 months before Alan Joyce left. This is something that started to happen even before COVID, and that's not been properly understood. So that was sort of my motivation, and I was just so happy that I had nothing else to do.
Well, unfortunately for Qantas, but I guess I know I've known you when you were at Rear Window, and you're an investigative journalist, but you also have a certain style of writing, which you would obviously be aware of. You have a style of writing that probably made Rear Window one of the reasons most people bought the AFR. I mean, you don't have to say yes or no, but I know a lot of people only buy it because today, especially, or back when you were writing, is because they wanted to either make sure they weren't being written about, or alternatively, they want to see who you were writing about, and if in any way they had any shape or form any reputational risk. And effectively, you're an investigative journalist. The way I look at it, you investigate issues or people, and you start writing about it. Where does that drive come from? That process, that thinking process. I mean, what's behind that, Joe? Like, why do you like to do this? What is it? Do you look at something that's unfair, or you think it's an issue that needs to be raised, or someone's getting away with something and it needs to be put out there? What's the deal?
It's a really good question. It evolved. Like, I didn't get into journalism to sort of like be Mr. Truth Seeker. That was not, I didn't have some sort of self-righteous objective. I got into journalism mainly because it looked like so much fun. You know, it looked like, accurately looked like what you got to do was go out to lunch with people, you know, and get them to tell you things that they shouldn't tell you, and then write them. And, you know, I enjoyed making mischief, and that suited me. But, you know, over time you would get bored, as anyone does in their career, if they just keep doing the same thing. Like if you work for a big company, you might move around into different roles, or, I just was stuck on the one column. But I was thankfully given the creative freedom to go from sort of writing a column which was just like have a laugh at this person, or, you know, being you know, a bit of a hypocrite, to in a light way, or even just gossip about who was out with who and who's talking to who. But I was able to, you know, I was given the freedom to change that and to become more of a commentator and more of an investigative commentator. It was quite an unusual format. It's hard when, like, if I talk to journos who are mates in New York or in London, and they sort of, you try and explain what Rear Window is, it's quite hard because there's nothing.
There's no other precedent, nothing around.
Well, there's not really anything overseas that you could absolutely directly compare it to, because it's sort of gossip, but increasingly it's commentary. But it's also news, and it's also satire, you know, or comedy, you know. So
satire is in the writing, the writing style.
Yeah,
you're quite brilliant. I mean, I've told you before, but you're quite brilliant in the way you write your writing style. It's very readable. But it's fun too. Like satire is sort of has to have a bit of fun associated with it.
It's also quite an Australian thing to laugh at people who take themselves too seriously.
Yeah,
you know, people who get laughed at, they don't like it. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. But actually, what it's doing is just, you know, holding a mirror up to people who are being pretentious or obnoxious or whatnot. And there's a little bit of it in Britain, but definitely in US journalism, they do not get it because they take themselves very seriously. The journalists, not just the people they're writing about.
So do you think the Rear Window style when you're writing it was a fairly unique proposition relative to, you know, what other journalistic sort of newspapers around the world, especially at the AFR level, on a national level, something with so much impact? Is that what you would say that was unique? It
got to that point where I think it was unique, and the reason that is like it wasn't just have a laugh. It was have a laugh, but underneath these laughs, look at the serious thing that's here. Look at all the data that's in there. Look at all the evidence and the research that's done. And that's what a lot of big, you know, businesses, business people couldn't fight off. They couldn't laugh it off because, you know, sure it was humor, but behind it was really serious issues. And that's how I campaigned on big companies like Rio Tinto and Magellan, and Alex Malley at the CPA, if anyone remembers him. And then, of course, there was PwC last year, which I was part of a team that was working on that. And then finally Qantas. And I think Qantas thought they could just, you know, laugh it off. It's just Rear Window. It's just gossip. And that's what a lot of people try to do. But increasingly the columns were pointing out with a lot of data stuff that was inconsistent about their behaviour, particularly towards customers and staff. And they found that was an error that they thought they could just brush it away, try and shut it down, laugh it off. It stuck to them.
So it's interesting you should say data, Joe, because I think what you mean by data is you mean evidence, proper evidence. And a mutual friend of ours told me once that many years ago when you were writing earlier that this guy, referring to you, is very good at getting his facts. How does someone like you get your facts? I mean, like, what's the process? How do you build, and like, let's say you got to write let's take us back to Rear Window days, and let's say, you know, there's an expectation you've got to write a column every day, 5 or 6 days a week?
5, but I had quite a few days off in between. Don't worry. By the end, I was not doing many weeks where it was 5.
But in the early days,
yeah.
So you got to get a yarn out, and you shared it. There was it wasn't just you, but there was a shared another. There's another journalist in that territory, and you got to get a yarn out every day. That's like it would seem to me you got to have like at least 5. You might have to have 10 or 20 topics going at once. What would you?
Because of course, when you see it come out, that doesn't. I might have been working on that for 3 or 4 days. You're sort of juggling all these balls because when will you be able to prove that one versus that one, and they're all bubbling away. It's like trying to cook do a dinner party.
You've
for
got
20
about 5
people.
games of chess going at once.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So what's that process like? Like, I mean, where do you get your ideas from?
A lot of the time, you got to be talking to people all the time, and just on the phone, and you got to be face to face with people because you got to build trust with people, and people need you to prove that you can be trusted. You got to have a track record of protecting people that
your
trust
source.
you with information. Yes, exactly.
Your source.
But I increasingly over time, I moved more into let's get documents. Let's look at financial documents, and let's look at what people say. Look at transcripts of what things have been said versus now what they're doing, and look for the discrepancies between those things. Because of course, relying on what someone says to you and what multiple people say to you versus what someone else says disagrees, and it all relies on human accounts of things.
Also agendas and opinions.
Yeah, it's always hard, right? Because, people are always calling you up saying, guess what, I'll tell you, and they tell you A, B, or C, and you always have to think, what is this person's motivation?
Yeah.
Are they acting because they're outraged that something bad is happening here? Or are they just trying to settle a score with someone? That's happening all the time. And by the way, just because someone's trying to settle a score doesn't mean that the information they're giving you is wrong. So you might still use it, but you've got to really be twigged to people's real motivations.
But how did you develop that skill? So, and what I mean by that is, did you study something, or did you just study someone else, or did you have a mentor sort of sitting there like, hey Joe, look, just check these set of accounts out? Do you have other resources to your availability to say, well, can someone give me the lowdown on these set of numbers?
Yeah, well, I mean, the great thing about being in the AFR newsroom is you've got some great, some really terrific reporters and subject matter experts there.
Analysts.
Yeah. And guys who've been there, guys and girls who've been there for a long time. They can read accounts. They know the industries that they write about. And then you also get to know lots of shareholders of companies, and they really are right in the weeds of things. Again, you got to figure out their motivations. Are they shorting the stock, or are they long the stock and therefore they're motivated, to only tell one side of the story? You're always watching, but just being in that spot, and as sort of became more high profile, you get access to the best people, and they, the great thing about that job was you pick up the phone to top people, and they answer, and they're happy to talk to you mostly.
Yeah.
And
unless they're the subject matter.
Yeah, well, even still, a lot of the time they will. But that's the quality access to experts that obviously that allows you to just supercharge your learning curve.
Yeah. Do you actually limit? But the more powerful you get, or not powerful is probably not the right word. The more content that you've created and the more feathers you've ruffled, does that then start to create a bit of a chasm for you in that people are going to say, oh, I'm not going to talk to him because if I talk to him, I could be included in the story? Do you get people starting to be scared of you or give you a wide berth?
Yeah, I think that definitely happens. It's a hard job if you do it properly. And I've sort of said before, you can't be a good journalist if you need to be popular or if you want to be popular. And that's hard because we all, I think, naturally are wired to want to be popular.
Yeah, we want to be liked.
Yeah, and no one some people do, but not many people are wired to enjoy conflict. But ultimately, your job is to publish. George Orwell said, this is one of my favorite quotes, journalism is publishing something that someone doesn't want to be published, and anything else is public relations.
Right.
And so ultimately, if you're doing journalism properly, you're writing something that the person you're writing it about doesn't want out there. And so you're doing something that they don't want. And so I really struggled with this in the early years because
you talk about pre-Rear Window or
no, during the early years of writing Rear Window.
Right.
I really struggled with I was quite afraid to answer the phone to someone that was angry. I was quite afraid to call someone up and say, I have this negative information about you. What do you say about it? And that led me to make mistakes.
Were you timid, naturally timid at that point?
I think I had a lot of false bravado.
Which means?
Well, it means that I was pretending not to be timid.
Right.
But I was very conflict avoidant,
Yeah.
which is not unnatural. It was really quite overwhelming at times. But I got better at that. And if you lean into it, it gets better. Because
Well, what makes you better at it then? So
it's practicing it. Instead of hiding under the doona, you just make yourself pick up the phone and have the hard conversation and look into someone's eyes and say, this is not personal. This is about the issue. This is not about the personality. Did this happen or did it not happen? This is what I think about this. Tell me what you think, even if you disagree with me. Tell me what you think. And I can still go away and say, no, I still think what I think. I disagree with your perspective. I'm still going to write it the way I was going to, but that process is important and really unnatural on a human level. Because, you walk around and you've said lots of negative things about people and people understandably hate you. And how do you not let that sort of eat away at you? You just have to be really certain that you're being fair and that you've, that your position is strong from where you're standing, and then you just have to let the rest of that go.
Do you have to pick a higher order? In other words, sort of say, look, I'm doing this it's important that people know about this truth or these facts, this content, this data that is important. Whether people read my column or is it more Australians, whatever, you might have a different view on that. But tell me that, I'd like that answer to that. Who is it that you're trying to take down the road to the truth? And when it comes to that as well, you have to take a view that it's so important that I don't care whether I upset the individual I'm writing about.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what you have to do. And there's a good bit in my book where Greg Hywood, who used to be the CEO of Fairfax, he was talking to Alan Joyce, because Alan Joyce obviously went to war last year with the AFR and pulled the AFR out of lounges.
I remember it.
So, but the thing people have probably forgotten is that 10 years before that, he did the same thing to the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age, and he pulled all those papers out of the airports and cancelled the advertising of Qantas in those newspapers because Adele Ferguson had written that he should resign because he just delivered a record loss. And Greg Hywood called him, this is in the book, Greg Hywood called him when he found out that Alan was pulling the advertising, and he said, do you realize that this journalism that we produce is what keeps society functioning? And, by pulling advertising like this, you're threatening the free press, which is how we keep this country together. And when you think about it, it all sounds so high and mighty. And I understand if people out there are rolling their eyes going, oh, you think that, what you do is so holier than thou, because I would roll my eyes too. And we also all tell ourselves these stories about ourselves to make ourselves feel better about what we do. So what I do is so important for the public. And so, I put my hand up there. But if you do think about it, without journalism, like Adele Ferguson's or Hedley Thomas's or Kate Mclachlan's or many others, Neil Chenoweth, you powerful people do not stop and pause before they do something that they shouldn't do. It's the existence of people like them who cause powerful people to go, I won't steal, I won't lie, I won't cheat, because I might get caught. And if there was no press holding them to account, there'd be all sorts of, society would break down. So it is an important thing. So you got to do it.
But do you have to remind yourself of that? Because if you're just written a story about somebody and then on the phone they're blowing up and their wife rings you and their PR agency rings you and every other person rings you, did at any stage when you go home you think, oh my God, what a crappy night? This would say pre-marriage. Because you when you're married, you have a partner, and it's probably a bit easier. You can sort of feel a bit more comfortable as you're home with your family. But let's say you're going home on your own or hanging out with whoever you're living with at the time. Do you ever get to the point where, oh fuck, this is so hectic?
Yeah,
it just stresses the shit out of me.
Oh, countless times I've said, what am I doing this? What is this? Yeah. Countless times I've said, there's got to be an easier way to make a buck.
Yeah.
And let me assure you there is. And so it is sort of a toil of love. You wouldn't be a journalist if you didn't love it, if you didn't love doing it. You certainly don't do it for other reasons because the pressure is high. And yeah, in the end, that's why I decided to leave the AFR. There were a few different reasons, but one of the big reasons was I just got to the point where I was like, there's a lot of just accumulated hostility. I walk into a room and everyone's just wants to kill me, and you just think, I might just need a bit of a break. I might just need a quieter life for a bit. Unfortunately, this book didn't. This book
it's
didn't.
madder than ever.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me about it.
Amanda, one of the things that probably results from prior to this book, though, results from the position you're in, is that you will make powerful enemies and powerful friends. And I know that you have powerful friends. How do you manage the old no fear or no favour sort of position in relation to that? How do you, in your own mind, how do you reconcile that? Do you just say, well, if something comes your way that you probably feel like, I don't want to have to write about this, because by its human nature, I would be that person. Do you hand it over to somebody else? Or what do you do? Like,
that's hard. And, you can be the subject of criticism about this. Oh, well, why aren't you writing about this? Why you didn't say anything about that person? And you sort of think, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's some sort of dirty favour or something like that. But
you're allowed to make the choice, aren't you, as a journalist?
Well, I think so, but I would also understand, look, I just don't want to be a hypocrite, right? And say, how dare you criticize me? I'm open to criticism on that. Like, you're still a human being.
Yeah.
You still make friends. And the thing about being a journalist is you then develop sources. And at some point, sometimes you get to a point where you've gone over that line, where you're just in way too deep with someone.
Yeah.
You have access to all of their personal life and secrets, and they trust you and they confide in you, and you sort of go, I'm beyond a journalist with this person now, and you just have to give it a wide berth professionally. And
you give that person a wide berth professionally? Or?
Well, that's what I have done.
Yeah.
And I think there's people who do it differently, and they continue to write about that person, but only positively. And I have not done that.
Yeah.
Or tried very hard not to do that. So you sort of, but you still get a bit of a hard time from people because you don't write about them. I mean, what are you meant to do? Just attack them as hard as you can, and not allowed to have any personal relationships. But I get the criticism. Like, people are always looking for you to be inconsistent, and it is an inconsistency to say, to hit this person, that person, but not that person and that person. But
it's sort of a bit unfair to expect someone like yourself or anybody to come home on a friend of yours. Like, you got to live you got your journalist world, but you got to live a life too.
Yeah, sure.
And all of a sudden you got your friends. You're not going to go around telling everybody what happened at the barbecue.
Correct. Exactly.
Like, why would you? And by the way, I don't think any journalist would. Do you think there's an expectation though by consumers of your stuff, readers? The expectation is that if you're going to be that person on one occasion, you've got to be that person on all occasions. You've got to be consistently at it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there probably are some readers who had unreasonable expectations about that. And I think then there would be other readers who understand that it's a human being, at the tiller doing this. And so they're going to have some human needs and human weaknesses and human preferences, and like, not only do you need to have friends in the world, you also need to have sources, and that is also a transaction in some ways, where you go, well, is this a source relationship or is this a potential subject? And it's all a bit of a grey area.
You've got to be careful I don't burn it, because it might be important.
Correct, but is it hypocritical not to burn it? Is it more important to burn this person because they've done the wrong thing than it is to maintain them as a source of information? That's a really hard transaction internally, which I've grappled with many times.
Do you ever get into the position where, because clearly you're playing the man, not the ball here, like that's your job, or the man, woman, whatever the case may be.
I mean, I would contest that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure I've made mistakes where I have played the man, but when I'm playing, I think I'm playing the ball and the person with the ball.
Right.
For what they're doing with the ball.
Yeah.
Like I'm not right. Again, I can imagine someone's going to say, what about that time? And I've made mistakes, but usually 99 times out of 100, it's this person. I'm not attacking that person because they're fat or thin or they're Asian or Jewish or, like, it's the idea is it's what they're doing in their job and what they're doing with shareholder funds or what they're doing in public office. So, okay, I put humor on top of that and have a laugh about it. And, that might people then say, oh, well, then you're playing the man. But I don't know that that's accurate.
Do you think people should get, I mean, if it's just a one-off story or two-off stories as opposed to what's the Chairman's Lounge, which is a whole book. And by the way, that's just a book that culminated at the end of a process because you'd already been going at Qantas for quite a while, as probably correctly, as you have done in the past with other entities, other groups. Do you think that most people who read your column when they're written about, for example, I've been written about in your column, I don't know if it was about by you, but by others, do you think they should, if it's just once or twice, listen, dude, get over it, don't worry about it. Like what do you think about that? What do you think people should say?
Well,
the subject should say, who cares? What do you want them to think?
Well, I mean, I want them to look at the issue. If you criticize someone,
but let's just say it's a fun thing, a bit of a
Oh yeah, then you hope that they laugh it off, and it's all just a bit of light entertainment. But if someone is ripping off their customers, or they're saying one thing and doing another, they're being a hypocrite, then I would hope that what they do is look at their behavior and think about the criticism that's being made. But it's also hard to do that because when people are under attack, they switch quite often from rational to emotional.
Yeah, cortisol jumps in.
Yeah, and it's very hard to think straight. And so you sort of have to give people that that sort of what's the word I'm going for?
Would I ever think Joe Aston could not think of a bloody word? Like unbelievable.
You sort of have to give people that leeway.
Best wordsmith I've ever met. Like unbelievable. I can't think of the word. I bet you if you're writing it, it'd be written, or you're typing it, it'd be 20 words heavier.
That's why I like writing, because I can sit there and craft the perfect sentence, and everyone thinks I'm so great with the English language. But then when you get me in front of a microphone, you realise I'm just as crap as anyone else.
Camera on
expressing myself. Yeah.
So and just on that, your style of writing. Look, I don't really remember you when you first kicked it off, but I certainly remember towards the end, your style of writing was very fluid, easy to read, very easy to read. It was entertainment. Is that something that you worked on to become good at, or was that something you've always been? Were you like at uni doing this sort of stuff, or at school you're writing
I was a speechwriter professionally before.
Right.
I worked as a journalist.
And who did you speech write for?
So James Hogan, the CEO of Etihad Airways,
Yep.
the airline that I worked for after I worked for Qantas and before I started at the AFR. And I read a lot. So I spent my 20s buried in novels, not so much nonfiction, but I just loved literature, and I actually dreamed that I could be a novelist. Unfortunately, that was a pipe dream, but that is a really good basis. And if you continue to read, I really love other people's great writing, and I'm always underlining phrases and just thinking about how other people render the English language. But the other part of it is you just get good at something you do every day.
Yeah,
it's nothing. It's absolutely no different to going and benching 4 times a week in the gym. Progressive overload as sitting at your desk writing 800 words a day for public consumption. Do that for 12 years and you'll have a big chest and you'll have a great writing style.
But Joe, you're being very modest, because I as long as my butt points to the ground, I could be pressing every day for the next 10 years and I'll never lift 140 kilos. and with your style of writing is sort of the 140 kilo territory. And so there's got to be a talent in there, as well as a love of it. You must love it.
I must be lucky to have some natural talent. That's I'll probably admit that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's some guys down the gym, mate, and they and I could start on the same day, do the same weights for the next 10 years, and they definitely will be lifting more than me in the period down the track. And do you feel as though sometimes, though, in terms of language and style of writing, that the satire that you attach to these things, do you ever think to yourself, like, well, I hope I didn't go too hard on that person in ridicule, like, I hope they don't feel ridiculed. Because when you're writing a book, it's more facts. You've got a lot more time.
Totally.
When you're writing a column, you've got to make it pithy and blah, blah, blah.
I agree with that. And that's part of the frustration I'm just grappling with, is that people understandably are pulling out little sections of the book now and really like obsessing about them, and that's all fine. But you sort of think if you really look at the whole thing, there's a lot more going on and a lot more, a lot of research and a lot of context. And definitely in a column, you can't get anything, you can't get everything in.
It can't be too dense either.
No, because you want people to just enjoy it.
Yeah, correct.
So look, well, when your original question was, do you worry that someone will feel ridiculed? It depends if they've done something ridiculous. And
Yeah.
in many cases, when I was writing about someone, they had done something ridiculous, and people should be laughed at if they do something ridiculous, especially with shareholder money or public money. But yeah, look, there are times where you go, I'll tell you what changed. At the beginning, I was trying to make a splash. I was young, I was immature. I was writing about stuff that was just a bit, it was a bit infantile. Like I was, making jokes about mummy bloggers and getting involved in culture war crap around, whether Julia Gillard was being treated unfairly as a woman or wasn't being treated unfairly. And I just look back and go, that was not the most important thing that was going on in Australia, but it was that was just my level of competence at the time. I'm embarrassed to say, but I think as it developed, I was able to ensure, and again, there were exceptions, unfortunately, but I was able to focus on, trying to punch up, always make sure that if I was going after someone, it was someone who was more powerful than I was. And I got better at that. Not perfect, but I got better at that as I went along.
Before I get on to the book, because I think it's important to establish Joe Aston, so I hope you don't mind me asking those sort of questions.
Sure.
About it, because I saw you interviewed on 7:30 Report this week, and I felt like, I'm not having a go with Sarah Ferguson, but I just felt as though, given the time she had to interview you, I felt as though it was, given that I know you, I thought it was an unfair discussion. I actually felt like you were quite guarded in that.
Mate, if you sit down with Sarah Ferguson, you're going to be guarded.
Totally.
She's a tremendous interviewer.
And does her homework.
Yeah,
and I get it. And I just didn't think that it was a good expression of Joe, of yourself. One of the things I do want to talk to you about, like just quickly, is that in the process of meeting lots of people, you have to go to lots of lunches. The danger of that is that you become a lush.
Yep.
Drinking, eating, blah, blah, blah. I know you're 5 years sober, I think. 5 years sober?
5.5 now.
5.5 years sober. Just take us through that. What's that process like?
Well, our mutual friend David Ginger was the first person who said to me in 2013, which is about 6 years before I actually stopped drinking, that I needed to do something about my drinking.
He was a boss at Channel 9 then?
Yeah, he was.
The group?
Yeah, exactly. Before the merger with Fairfax, but I was still doing stuff. We had the Fin Review had a TV show on Channel 9 at that point.
Yeah, I remember that.
So yeah, look, I actually sort of got into journalism now that I can be honest with myself and I have enough distance between it. I can now see that I got into journalism because it appealed to me that it was a job where I could start drinking in the daytime. Before that I'd been in office jobs and you had to at least stay sober during the day. And then I was like, you could just go out and get people drunk at lunchtime. And so it's unsurprising that I fell into that profession, and it just got worse and worse.
But was that a process so in other words, did you do that to sort of soften yourself relative to the person you're having lunch with by maybe having a couple of gin and tonics early, straight up? Or was that to get them off guard? Was that to get them into the mode?
Well, the thing is, it was both, but usually what happens when you become addicted to something is that you make excuses for yourself.
Right.
So you say, I'm doing this so that I can get the other person a bit loose. But really you're lying to yourself. What you're doing is you're just drinking because you're addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
And you're doing it to cope with all of the pressure that you're not dealing with in a healthy way. So that just got worse and worse, and eventually I just it got so bad that I had to stop.
How'd you do that?
I'm sort of lucky. I didn't sort of go to rehab or anything like that, but I just hit the fence. I was sick. I just got really, I was feeling really unwell all the time. Bloated, was losing I remember I was getting to the point where I could barely even really write anymore. And that really scared me. I was sitting there, I couldn't remember what words meant. And I needed a dictionary to put together a sentence by the end. And I just realized that it was going like this really rapidly. And so I was actually in New York on a work trip, and I called my editor-in-chief and I said, I'm really sorry, but I need a break. I'm about to disappear, and for health reasons, and I don't know when I'll be back. And I came back to Australia and went and stayed at a friend's house on the Central Coast for a couple of weeks and dried out, and then just got on with my life, trying to do it myself, and with friends, surrounding myself with the right people. But work was really amazing. They were very supportive. That year in 2019, they gave me a lot of time off and let me just get better slowly, because you don't get better fast. If you thrash yourself the way I was for 10 years, you don't sort of just have a day off drinking and all of a sudden you're back to healthy. It takes a long time for your brain to recover and for your body to recover. And now I just life's just changed so much, and I just feel so lucky because I know lots of other people who have what I have who don't make it.
And you got married during that period, or just a little bit later, thereafter?
Yeah, later. Yeah.
And you're married how many years now?
2
years, and you got a child.
Yeah, 6-month-old.
6-month-old. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I must have to say, when I first met you, I didn't think I just never imagined you settling down, so to speak. But
no, me neither.
Yeah, but you were pretty young. I don't even know how old you are, but you still look really young. But
I'm 41.
Well, so then this would have been.
I probably looked about 55 5 years ago. That's the thing.
Well, you look great at the moment. So,
thank you. That's kind.
So we got onto the book, right? So this week, at the time we're doing the podcast, but at the end of the week, it's all been about Albanese, and it's all been about did he make a call? Did he make a call? Can we just get some stuff cleared up straight away before we get into the rest of the book, the important part of the book? He's denied it. He said he didn't make a phone call. Reckons he's never really received any favours. I watched Paul Murray keep putting up on the code of conduct, the parliamentary code of conduct, which is, Julie Rudd's code of conduct, Julie Gillard's code of conduct, Kevin Rudd's code of conduct, and also Albanese's code of conduct. Is the issue that he shouldn't have accepted free flights? What is it? What's the issue? What is the issue?
Yeah. The reason Albanese's upgrades in particular are the focus of attention in that section of the book is because it's sort of context to understand how, it's context to how nobody can understand the Qatar decision that happened last year where, Qantas was in the toilet, worst customer service ever, highest airfares in living memory, and none of the airlines were flying enough seats. So there was really high travel demand, really low supply of seats. And Qatar puts their hands up and says, we'll fly more, we can bring in more flights right now. And that will bring prices down. And by the way, Qatar kept flying to Australia right through COVID when all the other airlines had packed up. And it's all on track to be approved. The Transport Department's in favour of it. Catherine King verbally, who's the Transport Minister, verbally says, indicates to Virgin that she's in favour of it because, of course, Virgin's the partner of Qatar. And then all of a sudden something changes. And so that is the relationship between Albanese and Qantas and Alan Joyce in particular is fair game and absolutely of high interest. The thing is, there's lots of questions. Like he declared those upgrades, and in some ways, ironically, he's being punished for being transparent about the fact the upgrades happened. The argument is, has he been transparent about how they happened? He only now, it's taken a lot of days to finally now say he didn't seek those upgrades. That's inconsistent with what I've written and inconsistent with what I know. But the fact is, he was Transport Minister. So that's the unique thing. He had unique powers over the airline industry. And so was that appropriate? I don't think it was. But having said that, this book is about how Qantas influences all politicians and both sides of politics. And that's really the big issue because this has been going on for 40 years. And like Rod Eddington says in my book, he was the CEO of Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong, British Airways when they owned a quarter of Qantas, and also Ansett. He was chairman of Ansett before they went down the tubes. And he says, Qantas is the best lobbyist in Australia, bar none. He can't think of anyone who's ever been better. And he competed with Qantas for the vast majority of his career. So many people accept that Qantas has had this really powerful influence over politicians, Liberal, Labor, National, everyone, for a long time. And so, I'm a bit bemused. It's just Albanese is Prime Minister today. There's nothing we could, do about that. But I am a bit bemused that that's the only angle that anyone's talking about. Because, a lot of it is about how Qantas managed to rip $2.7 billion of subsidies out of the Morrison government after they convinced the Morrison government not to save Virgin Australia with a financial lifeline. So their power is immense no matter who is in government in Canberra.
And is it a corporates sort of have a responsibility, well, they definitely have a responsibility to their shareholders under the corporations law. And part of the responsibility of the shareholders under the corporations law is to make sure that they can always out-survive everybody else as a business, that they can maximise a profit
Totally.
in order to pay dividends back to their shareholders. And if you're given an opportunity to put yourself in a position of power or influence, whether it's under Richard Goyder as chairman or anybody else, previous chairmans going right back for the last 40, 50 years, you would probably do it because it's like a risk management process. What is the objection to a corporation, let's call it managing politicians, the way Qantas is done?
Well, there is their responsibility to shareholders, but there is the politicians' responsibility to us citizens to make good policy that's good for the country and good for consumers as well. And so the problem is when Qantas is saying you can all have the chairman's lounge and we're going to give you upgrades, or they get asked for upgrades by politicians, which they do often, and they give them to them. And then what that fosters is an environment where Qantas is able to make politicians create bad policy for us as travellers. And that Qatar decision is a great example. Qantas managed to convince the government to defund the ACCC's airline monitoring powers last year, which was, again, an unbelievable decision when prices were sky high, service was terrible, Rex was basically in the process of being destroyed, and Bonza. So that's the issue. Qantas is absolutely entitled to and should do the best for its shareholders, and no one's saying Qantas should not make money, but it's the way they go about it.
Is there, but today, on today's standards, do you think there's a level of, at Qantas at least, from Qantas's point of view or Qantas's obligations, that there is a social license for them given? We give them a social license, the Australian people give them a social license through the government, given that they're a sort of, effectively the only airline here, particularly when it comes to overseas travel, domestically. Do you think they also have a social license on top of their profit obligations in total, on top of their looking after shareholder obligations, that they must look after the social license relative to their customer base?
Definitely.
And because that's relatively speaking, new concept, social license, like banks.
Yep.
Is that an issue?
It is new in a corporate sense. However, Qantas has been more than just a company for a long time. And part of this is a hangover from the fact that it used to be owned by the government. It was only privatised in 1995. But it's also the way they monetize the loyalty of their customers. All of their advertising is about being the national carrier, the spirit of Australia. So they're very happy to use the sort of social part of their brand to make more money and to sell us tickets that are more expensive than on any other airlines for service that is quite often inferior. But then when they're expected to meet the responsibilities that come with being the national carrier, not just a profit-making corporation, they sort of go, oh, well, hang on, we're just a company. So they can't have it both ways. And Qantas did try and have it both ways in COVID. They shut down internationally. Other airlines kept flying to Australia, and there were, many, many Australians stuck overseas. They took COVID subsidies, lots of them. Not more than foreign carriers, like American carriers got more from the American government, European carriers got equity injections from their governments, but they got big amount of subsidies, and they took JobKeeper especially. They were the biggest recipient of JobKeeper, and then they illegally sacked people while those people were on JobKeeper. And so it's the way they acted. They also started paying share buybacks. So they started returning hundreds of millions of dollars to their shareholders right after they just received, billions in subsidies, and they weren't, instead of reinvesting in the product so that the standards were good enough. So they had their priorities all out of whack. That's not even just social license. That's just, if you treat your customers so badly that you destroy your brand, then your shareholders will ultimately suffer. And even in the book, Qantas's largest shareholder says a lot of stuff, but one of the things he points out is that they were so focused on making this record profit out of COVID to prove that it was the turnaround of all turnarounds. But actually, if they just said, let's make, $200 or $300 million less this year, put that back into catering, call centers, putting more frontline staff in the airport terminals, all those kind of things that would have made things better for customers, the share price wouldn't have collapsed as much because there wouldn't have been a public uproar. So you can you can actually almost make too much money if you're too single-minded about it. And that's what Qantas had under Alan Joyce before COVID, they were at this point where they had this, I call it the Holy Trinity, which is very original, I know. But, customers, shareholders and staff, and they were all in this perfect balance. Qantas was making lots of money. Its staff loved the company and its customers loved the company. And COVID, after COVID, Alan Joyce just allowed that to fall completely out of whack.
Do you think it's a single-minded brilliance, though? But the single-mindedness wasn't that good.
Oh, well, it's a big character study. And
I'm talking about the character, which is Alan Joyce, of course.
Yeah.
A single-minded brilliance, but the single-minded part of it wasn't right.
It wasn't. It became
balanced.
problematic. Because his single-mindedness was probably a great strength until it was no longer a strength. You know,
Did it become an obsession?
Well, look, I wouldn't go that far. But
not for you. I'm talking about for him.
Yeah.
His single-mindedness to make the profit at all costs.
It certainly became his overriding priority, and that's also because of his incentives. Because the bigger the profit, the higher the share price. Theoretically, and his pay was mostly in shares, so his incentives were get the share price ramped.
Right.
And so it is a really interesting character study because it's over. I go into Alan Joyce turned up. Qantas was sort of collapsing financially. Its results when he took over in the GFC. He just chipped away, tried to make Qantas more efficient, got it into this pretty good position before COVID. But by the time COVID had hit, he sort of started to lose his judgment a little bit. And that happens to people. Like, again, there's this great man theory of history and people go, oh, well, that's all a bit made up. But I think Qantas is a great example of someone who really, he was there for so long, he came to dominate the organisation. His chairman changed in 2018. So he went from having this really very commanding chairman in Lee Clifford, who'd run Rio Tinto. And really, you knew who was boss between those two. Then he leaves in 2018. Richard Goyder comes in and he's a far more deferential, nice man and
hands off.
And I think plus Alan Joyce was much more confident by that point. He'd been there for more than a decade and he was like, no one was questioning his judgment. But the thing is with power, and this is an interesting psychological study, power affects people. If you're in a powerful social status or professional status for a long time, it actually starts to affect you just like a traumatic brain injury.
As in judgment.
Yeah, because, like normal people, I probably am not very normal, but just say I could consider myself normal. We're not very important or powerful. We sit around with each other, we talk. Say we're in a meeting, we're looking to each other subliminally. This isn't conscious, but subliminally, we're looking to each other to co-regulate each other's responses. So, you laugh when I laugh and I'll, grimace when you grimace. I'll look at my shoes at the right time. And that's how humans communicate. Yeah. But powerful people over time, they become detached from that process because they don't have to care what other people think because they're in charge.
They don't have to be part of the community. They form the community.
They just drift away and they are not co-regulated by other people, especially because everyone is inferior to them. So nobody would not laugh at their joke. Nobody says, that's not funny. No one says, boss, you're full of shit. People stop saying that to them. That the longer that they're in power, it affects them progressively. And you've seen that in lots of politicians that stay in office too long. CEO should not be, nobody should be CEO of a large Australian company for 15 years. It's too long and I reckon, I don't want to verbal Alan Joyce, but I reckon he would wish that he left in 2019 when he'd been there 11 years. It was right before COVID hit. The share price was really high. Everyone loved him. He was a hero over gay marriage. And instead, the board offered him a contract extension. And instead of leaving then, he stayed. And then COVID happened and the rest just got out of control.
But whose responsibility is it? Is that the board's responsibility?
It's 100% the board's responsibility.
In relation to what the CEO is doing. Because when you said something interesting there a moment ago, when someone's been in the role for a number of years, what they tend to do is they actually put people around them and sift out those people who are around them who don't fit into the category, who are actually they're going to laugh at their jokes. They're not going to sort of, especially if the business is doing well or making money and or the share price is high, they're going to, everyone's going to play the game, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it seems to me then what you're talking about here in the book, what you're sort of revealing is maybe regulators need to take a greater role in these things. Do you think regulators have a need to sort of say, well, maybe there's a tenure period or?
I think that's making excuses for bad performance of boards. Like
or maybe the regulators got to talk to the good.
Well, I think the boards need to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And then you don't need regulators to do anything that they're not already doing.
Yeah.
You know, like a good board at Qantas would have in 2019 said 11 years is enough. It's time. Instead, they gave them another contract extension. A good board would have, more importantly, you know, you can argue the toss on 2019 should have been 2020. And then if it was 2020, COVID happened and you couldn't really change CEOs in the middle of a crisis. So, you know, you could argue the toss on that. But what you can't argue the toss on is when Qantas was running off the rails, you know, they were in a brand crisis. They'd become toxic. And because Alan Joyce had been there for so long, he had come to inhabit the Qantas brand. People just...
He became the flying kangaroo.
Well, he became the devil of... You know, he almost became the devil incarnate and people hated him so much. Fairly or unfairly, that's how people felt that. And that wasn't just... That's not me saying I reckon that's true. That's in the brand consumer research from Roy Morgan, RepTrak, all the big research houses were finding this. What you can't argue the toss is that at that point, the board of directors at Qantas should have said, Alan, we need to fix some things here. No, if not to get rid of him immediately, at least to say all these things need to change. COVID credits, not good enough. You know, we got to pay, we got to settle with the baggage handlers who we sacked illegally. Let's pay them money now and apologise. You know, a whole bunch of stuff they could have done. But instead, it was just Alan just kept fighting, which was his instinct. Overpowering instinct was always to fight. He's a real street fighter. And the board was just, well, Alan Joyce he knows better than we do, and we can't second guess him.
But how do you? That's interesting. So the balance between a board and the balance between the personalities on a board and the CEO. Often CEOs generally, if they're powerful, can select their own board, and or work over the chairman or chairperson. And I'm not suggesting this has happened with Richard Goyder, but generally a really good CEO who's bringing good results. Put aside what happened in post-COVID, you know, with the sort of demise of the brand, et cetera, and the things that were going on, and they don't want to challenge the CEO. How would you say? I mean, you've written the book, and you know you've obviously observed a lot of stuff at a greater depth than anybody else in relation to this particular case study, Qantas. How do the shareholders then? Is it up then to shareholders to recognise what's going on and then go on and say make some changes themselves at the board level? Because yes, the board is responsible for the CEO, but the shareholders are responsible for the board.
Yeah, they own the company. That's a very good point. Good point.
And then the CEO usually knows the big shareholders.
Oh yeah,
and it was sort of got a sort of
and guess what? They're all members of the Chairman's Lounge as well.
Correct. So it's a sort not an unholy alliance, but it's
it's a circle of
quite a clever process.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm saying about Alan Joyce's single-minded brilliance around himself.
Yes. I think that's fair.
And he's worked every aspect
every angle, and he's
including governments.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
no,
not just government.
Yeah.
Shareholders.
Yeah.
Board.
Yep. 100%.
Senior staff.
He raised the sort of the capturing of strategically important people to a high art, and that included his board members, and definitely, I think he was very good at investor relations because he was very focused on that issue. And they trusted him because he had got Qantas from where it was. You know, the share price was, you know, bumping along the ground at $1 a share for a long time. And by 2019, before COVID, it was $7.40. So he'd you know, more than, you know,
seven-bagger.
Yeah, it's a seven-bagger. I mean, amazing investment.
That's ridiculous.
But of course, what anyone should know about the airline business is it's cyclical. It is the most cyclical business of all cyclical businesses.
Yeah, so it tells us about a new trend before anything else.
Yeah, anyone knows that if the share price gets to $7, then the next place it's going to get to is $3.
Yeah,
you know, like that's what airlines do. And now it collapsed to like $5 last year when all of this stuff was blowing up and Alan resigned. And guess what? It's back to $8. And everyone's thinking that they're really smart. But, you know, at $8, I mean, this isn't investment advice, but at $8, quite clearly it's toppy and it's going to fall again. Like, it's a bit of a trading stock. So lots of people trade in and out because, you know, it's just going to be like a roller coaster all the time.
So have you spoken to Alan Joyce about the book?
I have not. I tried to, approached him. There's a statement from him in the book, which I thought was a bit amusing, where he complains that the book will not be balanced or fair towards him. I don't know if he's read it and whether he still thinks that it wasn't balanced or fair. I tried hard to give him credit for what he did well.
What did he do well?
Well, what he did really well was the hard graft of making Qantas more efficient because, you know, today maybe it's too efficient. But back in 2008, when he took over, and I worked there then, it was a very fat, lazy company. And in fairness to Jeff Dixon, who was the predecessor to Alan, it was much less fat and lazy than when Jeff took over. But that's the sort of thing when you take over a government business, it's so fat and hierarchical, and you just got to do the slow, hard work of making it more efficient, pulling costs out year after year after year. And that's boring, unsexy work that no one's going to give you.
But it's hard graft, I get it.
It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And
where did he go wrong?
Yeah, I was just going to try and give him credit for something else because he's done a lot of other good things. But where did he go wrong?
Because what did he do? I mean, there's lots of things he did wrong.
He did.
But
where
did it start?
Well, one thing he did wrong was he just the one thing that led to all the other things was that he allowed hubris to take over. And there was a moment when COVID hit where Qantas was worried that they were in trouble, but very quickly they realised that they had a very strong balance sheet and that they could survive without any government help. They said publicly, no, we don't need money, we're fine. And so Virgin shouldn't get any money because they calculated that if they didn't get any money and Virgin didn't get any money, Virgin would fall over.
They knew who would survive.
And it fell over, right? So next thing you know, they've got through that, they've knocked over their competitor, and then they change their mind and say, we do want money. But it's easily forgotten that.
That's pretty clever though.
Exceptionally clever. Yeah. He was a very good strategic thinker. And by June 2020, like they had got their costs down. They a really big achievement to like contract the business into this tiny like dormant thing in mothballs where it was only burning $40 million a week. And they said they could survive for 18 months like that without a dollar of revenue coming in the door. So they never thought they were going to collapse, even though they later started saying, we were almost going to collapse. They never thought that would happen, truly. But so what Qantas did at that point was they raised more than $1 billion from shareholders when the share price had recovered. And they didn't say, we need this $1 billion and a bit dollars to survive, just as working capital. They said, we need this money to sack 10,000 people and pay $1 billion in redundancy payments. And that was too many people to sack. But what clearly Alan Joyce saw was an opportunity. COVID became an opportunity to supercharge Qantas's profits, and he went for gold. He was clearly seeing we can basically turn Qantas into Jetstar, with higher prices. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like really savagely cut the costs and reduce the quality of the customer experience.
And push the prices.
And keep the prices high, and the profit margin will just get fat. And so if you're a fund manager and Alan Joyce is proposing such a capital raising, you're going to say, that sounds great, sign me up. And they all did. And surprise, surprise, they did make the super profits when they came straight out of COVID. But what they also did was they fell to pieces operationally, because if you sack 10,000 people from a 30,000 people company.
It's 1/3.
Almost, yeah. It was like from 29,000 to like 21,000.
Wow.
So it's like, 6% or something like that, a huge number. And you come back, and how do you really think you're going to operate properly? The wheels are going to fall off because, there's so far fewer people working in the airport terminals or working in the engineering department, and you haven't kept your pilot training or your cabin crew training fresh because you wanted to save money. There's so many areas where they were just threadbare. And of course they say, but it was COVID sickness. We couldn't have expected that. And it was supply chain disruption. We couldn't have expected that. And the thing about this story, it's why it needs to be a book instead of an article, is those things are partly true, but they use those things as if they're wholly true. And so of course, COVID sickness in the staff and supply chain disruption for parts, that made an impact and made it worse. But it is not the reason why Qantas's performance in 2022 and 2023 was so horrific. And we all remember how bad it was. I mean, anyone who tried to travel in 2022, it was hellish. And that was all because Qantas was being greedy.
Someone told me that a pilot actually told me, one of the captains told me that Qantas sent a whole lot of planes to the US and mothballed them, effectively put them in the desert in Vegas.
Mojave Desert,
Yeah, because it's dry there and things don't rust as much.
Yep.
And in fact, he was also saying to me when the borders reopen and Qantas is going to be flying in and out, they won't have the planes to do it.
No, No, they still don't have. So those A380s, a lot of their aircraft went there, but all their A380s were shut down properly, like really put into proper storage. And there were 12 of them that went up there. They ended up scrapping 2 of them for metal, and so that they reduced the A380 fleet to 10. And then there are still 2 that have never come back because it's taking that long to get them through heavy maintenance. So there were a lot of short-sighted decisions. Now, by the way, Qantas doesn't really want them back because they're such big aircraft that they bring prices down. So Qantas now, post-COVID, is playing a game of keep the number of seats that we fly constrained, and then we can keep our airfares much higher.
But the assumption around that, well, there is a presumption in that model, that business model, is that people feel compelled to fly Qantas. So where does the platinum member and the chairman's club membership maintenance and, keeping my miles up, all the other memberships and all the loyalty programs, where does that fit into that business model?
It's a huge part of it.
Explain that.
Part of it. So it's funny. There's a double status points promotion on this week. Well, by the time you go to air, it'll be over. But I'm as guilty as the next person. I'm booking all these flights. So
but Joe, why do we do that? Why are we so interested in our flying status?
Oh, it's such a good question, and I'm guilty of it myself. I mean, especially once you actually get to the platinum or platinum 1 or whatever status or chairman's lounge status, and you go, what is the value of these benefits really? Is it really that good in this lounge, or in the airport terminal you can get just as good, probably a better coffee and a better sandwich than you can in here anyway.
Yeah. Is it because because when you're in the chairman's lounge you're rubbing shoulders with all these powerful people?
Correct, and it tells you that you have arrived. This is an ego massage. I am one of the inner sanctum elite members of Australian society, and people want to feel that way. And people,
because you look over there's the Prime Minister, or there's the Treasurer.
Yeah, and we've been Western culture has conditioned us to be like this, and that's the same reason why people wanted to pay $10,000 a year to have a black Amex in the day before credit cards were all on your phone. I mean, it's the same concept. You want to pull that card out where people go, oh, he's somebody, right? Or she's somebody.
Is there a certain amount of flattery deserving for someone's marketing brilliance?
Hell yes. Oh, full credit. And the Qantas Frequent Flyer program is the great success story of the Joyce era, I would say. And I think when I worked at Qantas in 2008, 2009, that sort of period, I think there might have been like about 6 or 7 million members of the Qantas Frequent Flyer program. There's now 16 million. Now, they're not all super active members, but there's 16 million members. There's only about 20 million adults in Australia. So that would be the equivalent as if the United or Delta or American loyalty program in America had like 250 million members, which they don't.
So there's no proportional equivalence?
Hell no. It is globally unique to have
so
that
he's done
much
a brilliant
penetration.
job. He has done a brilliant job.
At that.
Or somebody.
Well, I mean, he was the CEO. You got to give him the credit.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it is what is underneath all of so competitors of Qantas, they scratch their head, they try everything, they try their own lounges, they drop their prices, they change their routes, they lobby in Canberra, and they go, why can't we beat them? Not only why can't we beat them, why can't we even come close to even competing with them? And what's underneath it is that loyalty program, because it's got such deep penetration. People value it so much. It's also like the sunk cost theory. Like, I'm in this deep. I've been a platinum for this long, or a chairman's lounge member for this long.
I can't let it go.
I can't let it go now. Yeah. It's part of how
I've invested too much.
It's part of how my life works.
Yeah.
I've got all these points. If I switch now, then I'll never be able to use them. It's genius.
Yeah.
And that's why, no matter how badly Qantas treats its customers, they know, Qantas will never admit this, but they know we will keep coming back for more punishment.
So, and therefore you can build a business model off that.
So therefore they can treat you poorly. And so there's no incentive for them to compete on the quality of their product. I shouldn't say there's no incentive. There's a lower incentive for them to compete on the quality of their product, like other airlines have to do in other parts of the world. So that's why they calculate, stuff it. We'll make the catering crap. We'll let the planes get old. We'll let the lounges deteriorate till the carpet's threadbare, because it won't make a difference, because the suckers will just keep rolling through the door.
And how much of that is when they call them, Qantas is called the spirit of Australia, which is like in my view is absolutely brilliant.
I agree.
Like they're like so good. In fact, I had on my mentor podcast the family who did all the Flying Kangaroo, the whole thing for Qantas, and also launched Virgin Blue for that matter here in Australia. And the brilliance of their program, their market, their externals, but to Qantas, but the brilliance of their marketing program was just like amazing.
That was one of Singo's, like that was peak John Singleton when he was the great ad man, in the day. Him and Jeff Dixon created those choir ads around the Sydney Olympics.
Yep.
And they are the
Still
greatest
call Australia home.
I think the greatest Australian advertising campaign ever. Period. Like there is nothing as good as that.
Yeah. Well, maybe Common Aussie, come on, but that type of thing. Yeah. But it's that. But,
well, that's another one. Yeah. That's another good example.
But we're talking about iconic music, iconic lyrics, iconic imagery.
Yeah.
And I want to be a member of that.
Yeah.
And I'll do anything.
Yeah, I want to be one of the most valued customers of that company. I want to associate my own life with that brand because people do. They identify in ways with brands and they align with them and they use them as proxies for themselves.
Well, that's who I am.
Yeah,
I'm the spirit of Australia, sort of thing. I mean, this is what we tend to think.
Yeah,
so therefore, Qantas sort of has done. Qantas, not anyone in particular, but Qantas as a group, as a corporation, has done quite a brilliant job as a corporation, edging everyone else out of the system. I mean, like you're out, I'm in. It helps that they were the first airline here ever in the country, but they've done quite a brilliant job of maintaining their position and actually enhancing their position overall.
Yeah, and they've made it into a fortress. And one of the ways...
That's a good way of describing a fortress.
Yeah, well, good businesses have moats.
Yeah.
As you know very well. And, how do you get over the moat and into the fortress to compete with them? And it's very hard once you have such a dominant competitive position. And Jetstar, Jeff Dixon created Jetstar. And he appointed Alan Joyce to be the first CEO of Jetstar.
Oh, really? Is that right?
Yeah, and that was a globally unique thing as well. Like no full service airline had ever said, let's create a budget carrier to compete with us.
Yeah.
Because that was considered like cannibalizing yourself. It was like later
You would never do it.
Well, Steve Jobs created the iPhone, which destroyed the iPod.
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of like that. It was very against the grain thinking. And to this day, airlines around the world have tried and failed to replicate the Qantas Jetstar thing, dual brand strategy, they call it. And it makes it impossible for Virgin to ever really get it makes it very difficult for Virgin to ever do anything other than really get the scraps. And certainly for a Rex or a Bonza or another upstart, it makes it very difficult for them to ever have a chance. If Qantas, Virgin and Jetstar were three different companies and they were competing with each other, that would be a much more competitive market for consumers and would there be better outcomes? But that's never going to happen. I mean, no government's ever going to force Qantas to sell Jetstar. But it's the way they do, they can just squeeze everyone from both ends. So you've got Qantas with all the highest paying customers, paying the highest fares. And then you got Jetstar, which just rakes up all the cheapest travel, all the leisure holiday travelers, and they have the lowest costs. So they don't have to make a huge amount of money, Jetstar. The real cream's made by Qantas, but they just take all this traffic, the cheap end and the expensive end, and they squeeze their competition in the middle. So Virgin's stuck in the middle trying to be a little bit premium, a little bit like budget. And so what are they? They're just sort of a bit of a blancmange. And like again and again, they just dominate by that. And they really got Rex that way too.
They've squeezed everyone out. What?
And by the way, no one should blame Qantas for being a really aggressive competitor. Like that's what shareholders want them to be, and no one should take that away from them. But it's where does aggression cross over into anti-competitive?
Yeah,
and like if you dump the prices,
and I think that's the point, anti-competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but whose responsibility is that? Are we
talking that's the government's responsibility.
Are we talking about the ACCC?
Well, the ACCC is part of the government, and the government, the political part of the government also is in charge of sort of setting the powers and the budgets of the ACCC.
Policies.
Well. Yeah, so it's the government in totality that sets aviation policy. But
so is that therefore why governments sort of compromising themselves or putting them in a position where their position can be questioned and or possibly compromised? Is that your whole point?
Yes.
Because, here's this mob who become extraordinarily powerful, done a great job for their shareholders, etc. Blah blah blah. You, the government, should not put yourself in a position where you're going to have to we're all going to be second guessing your decision, because the only way that their power can be managed by virtue of their great success is through you, the government who we voted in. Is that your whole point?
It's exactly right. Yeah, it's exactly right.
That's the thesis of the book.
Yeah, you've nailed it.
Yeah. Well, but and it doesn't really matter whether it's Albanese or because
it's just another politician.
There were people before that.
Scott Morrison sucked up to Alan Joyce as hard as Albo ever did,
and the next person after Albo will do the same thing.
Margaret Jackson and Jeff Dixon before Alan Joyce came along were just the most phenomenal lobbyists. They a long time ago, Singapore Airlines wanted to launch flights between Australia and the US and compete with Qantas. And Jeff and Margaret at Qantas killed it stone dead, and John Howard blocked it. There's been like example after example. This is not an Albo thing. It's not a ScoMo thing. It is a system thing.
So do you think that's? But is that a politician reading the tea leaves saying, well, Australians love this company, and
they did love this company.
Yeah, correct. But if I go back though, it's like the koala bear. We can't have anything that's going to challenge our icons, what we love.
But that's why Qantas was being so ingenious by branding itself that way. That also was part of the whole thing. Not only did it make us want to travel with them, it also allowed them to effectively blackmail governments and say, well, what about all the jobs? If you let, like all these people will have to sack. In my book, Margaret Jackson said to a Howard government minister, when she was lobbying against the Singapore Airlines thing, she brilliantly said, "Well, you can allow Singapore Airlines to compete with us on the Pacific to America, but you'll just have to explain to the people of Tamworth why they're now catching the bus to Sydney."
Right.
It's blackmail, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm giving her credit for that. And they're terrific lobbyists, and governments time and again have fallen for their stuff on jobs in particular, like protecting Australian jobs. But then the problem with that argument under Joyce at the end was that he was sacking so many Australians and not just sacking them, but offshoring jobs. Like now, a lot of crew on Qantas are based overseas. That's all happened under him. So that argument gets diluted, and the unions, even though it's a Labor government and sort of the Albanese is really pro Qantas, you've also got all the unions in the Labor Party who are very anti-Qantas because of what they did to employees. So it's sort of a complicated story. Again, why it's frustrating that the whole thing gets boiled down to just Albo Qantas. It's even in the Albanese government, they were very, very anti-Qantas on industrial relations. They changed the laws so that Qantas has got to pay a lot more for its crew than it did. So
there are some branding points for the government in relation to the way they've managed Qantas's power.
I'm not sure. I mean, that's giving them maybe more credit than I want to give them. But I would just say that it is nuanced. That's why this needs to be a book and not an article.
It's why this needs to be like a longer conversation and not a 10-minute conversation, which is why I asked you to come on the show, because I think that we Australians, people are going to read this book, we need an opportunity to get the context around it. And I think it's really important that we all get context around what it is, because otherwise Joe Aston becomes the devil incarnate himself. Because it'll be 50-50.
Yeah.
Some are going to say, good on you, well done. There'll be some saying, oh, why are you pulling the organisation apart?
Yep.
I mean, and to some extent, you're going to get caught up in this furore. I mean, how you been handling it?
Well, you just put one foot in front of the other and focus on the work and the issues. Not the emotion or the politics. It's just.
Yeah, but you're front and center at the moment. You're the most controversial journalist at the moment. We have an election coming up. Albo's struggling at the polls. He bought a house recently. That didn't help him. It's not like the timing of your book's perfect in terms of the book relative to Albo.
It'll blow over.
You're a journalist. You know how this works. So what do you reckon will happen?
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you how the Albanese government will respond. But I do think in terms of the political
narrative
cycle, people move on. And the thing is, these stories morph. So everyone just attacks Albo for a few days, and then it turns out that other politicians were doing oh whoops, we didn't disclose our upgrades, or
I better disclose.
And then that all becomes a story, and then they quickly realize nobody can win from this, because they all really just want to stay in the chairman's lounge and they want to still be able to keep getting their upgrades, and they all realize that and go, let's just stop talking about this.
Does it mean nothing will change?
I have very low expectations of change. I mean, punters, punters, I think, are hungry for change. They're sick to death of this stuff. Not just in Australia, like the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is getting absolutely killed over the free concert tickets that he accepted and the free football game tickets. And there's just a real tiredness from the public, not internationally in Western democracies, of politicians that are just seen to be in it for themselves and for the trappings of office. If Albanese came out and said, I get it, right? Let's not quibble about this. I am ending Chairman's Lounge membership for all politicians. I'm ending upgrades for all politicians. They are forbidden. I think his polls would go up, and that would be a smart thing to do. However, how would his popularity go in the party room? Because politicians really care about this stuff. But there's a good sorry if I'm talking too long, but there's a good parallel with John Howard in 2004. And you might remember Mark Latham was banging on about how politicians getting their lifetime pensions was an outrage. And arguably, there was some outrageous examples in the system. So John Howard came out and he just ended it. Even though that was that good policy? I don't know, but it was he screwed over every incoming politician after that. He just got up and he said, I'm taking this issue off the table and I'm ending all life pensions. Now, from now on, when you're elected to Parliament, you get 15.4% superannuation, which is still more than most people, but that's what the public service gets. And that's it. There's no pension when you leave. That is it. And if Albo took the same approach and said, all right, we're all going to get our snouts out of the trough, no more upgrades, no more Chairman's Lounge, that would be a really smart and similar approach. You just have to think maybe it's gone too far now. Either it's gone too far or maybe it's blown over and he's hoping and everyone's hoping that no one gets back to it and that no one can't, that they've sort of survived and they can cling on to their goodies.
Does he does he pick up the phone and say, hey, Joe, what the hell's going on here?
No.
Prior to that, would you?
Last year I tried to engage with his office when I wrote the fact that his son had been put in the Chairman's Lounge, and his office was impossible to deal with. Would not return phone calls for days, repeated phone calls over and over again. Would not respond to emails, repeated emails, which is just pretty crazy given these people are paid by the public to respond to questions from journalists. So the only communication was when he would call my editor-in-chief to complain.
Your boss.
Yeah. And wanted to kill the story. And luckily I have an editor-in-chief who doesn't do that if a story is true. So, and only this week, he finally admitted that, yes, his son is in the Chairman's Lounge. So that was something that was written a year ago. He's never even acknowledged it or he's refused to even answer whether it was true. So now he's finally sort of come out and it's been a bit messy, obviously, but I don't have a direct relationship with him.
What about Alan Joyce?
No, I tried to, as I said, I tried to contact, I did reach out to Alan Joyce repeatedly. I asked him to talk to me for the book. I was keen on
before he exiled himself from Australia back to Ireland, or
no, this was this year. You know, in the process of writing the book. Again, Alan Joyce was not someone who ever tried to engage with me directly. He also complained about me to my boss. What do you do? You know, my boss. It's all written about in the book. You know, my boss repeatedly said to him, "If you can point to me the facts here that are wrong, then we'll fix it." But you know, last year at that time, Joyce was unable to identify those, and so he was just frustrated because he just didn't want to be criticised. And again, that was his judgment had gone astray. He was no longer able to say, "I'm being criticised by this person. Maybe I should think about the substance of those criticisms and are they accurate?" But he was just so black and white, so self-blind. You know, it was my way and any other way is wrong, and that's the point that he got to, and that's what did him in.
Do you think we've lost much by Alan Joyce leaving the country? And I think he's in Ireland permanently.
No. He lives here.
He lives here.
Yeah, he went away immediately to escape the furor, and
there was an inquiry on he didn't get.
Yeah, he left the country, and so the Senate couldn't call him as a witness.
Yep.
Sorry,
we don't know if that's the reason.
Yeah, but he wasn't able to be compelled to attend. Yeah. Look, the thing about Australia is, and this is why I was sort of disappointed he didn't talk to me, because I suspect it probably changed the book by not having his voice in it. I'm not saying that it would have become a really pro-Alan Joyce book if he had spoken to me, but I think it would have had more of his perspective. And the thing is, Australians actually like a comeback story. You know, we like really hammering people who do the wrong thing, or, you know, even perceive to pop their head up too high. But equally, those people who turn things around or they come back, the redemption tale is a bit of an Aussie favourite.
Oh, it's a love affair, mate.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Alan Joyce is back in the future. It's not like he's not at Qantas, but
No.
You know, like, you don't sort of just lose all of the experience and valuable knowledge that you have from a company or running in such an important company for such a long time. And potentially after a period in the wilderness, he gets better perspective as well on the mistakes that he's made. I'm sure he wouldn't agree with everything that I've said, but I reckon probably over time you start to say, yeah, probably just did that wrong, probably could have done that better. I'm not in the business of sort of like trying to bury people.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I don't want Alan Joyce to be gone, banished, you know, forever. That's not my intention any more than it's my intention to try and destroy Anthony Albanese. I mean, I'm just trying to put the facts out there and put together what happened at Qantas and let other people make their judgment.
Just so we be clear on this, so that there was a bias that that's been sort of leaked in the media that you remember the Liberal Party and et cetera. Can we just put that into context now?
Well, that I was a Liberal Party staffer, which is all in the book.
Yep.
I mean, that's
been disclosed.
Yeah,
Can you just express it now?
Yeah, sure. So I started out as a political staffer for Bruce Baird and Joe Hockey in the Howard government. That was the last time I worked in politics.
Two of the great politicians.
And but that was the last time I worked in politics. I mean, that's almost 20 years ago. I then worked as a journalist for 12 years. And I still talk to lots of people in politics on both sides. That's what journalists do.
Are you political?
No, far from it.
Yeah.
I have no interest in politics, and actually, I much prefer writing about business than politics. Again, because the responses tend to be rational instead of emotional. So it was sort of expected that you're going to get attacked. You know, that's playing the man, not the ball. To say, well, you know, he wasn't addressing the substance of the book. He was sort of suggesting that I had improper motivations, and I don't think that's. Well, I can tell you that's not right. There was even a story in the news.com where I had been pictured having lunch with Peter Dutton like 9 months ago or something like that, which I thought was quite funny, really, which was true. I mean, there I am in the photo. But you catch up with politicians, you talk to them, but that's been painted as a conspiracy theory.
Well, Peter Dutton certainly didn't say, look, Joe, could you sit and write a book about and mention Anthony Albanese?
Yeah, sure, no worries. No worries, Peter. I'll just go down a rabbit hole for 10 months just for you.
Can I just pique your journalistic sort of interest, et cetera, for a moment? One of the things you mentioned, Qantas being sort of a monopolist or having too much control in relation, or having a lot of control in relation to one aspect of Australian business. But if you think about Australian business generally, we've got 3 or 4 major insurance companies, 3 or 4 big banks. We 3 or 4 big telcos, supermarkets as well. It's sort of like a symptom of Australian economy at the moment
because of its size.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the reason, but that could be the reason. Perhaps it is. But do you think that we will never solve these issues? Because and I mean, like CBA, for example, was owned by the government, one of the most loved banks in the country, probably got 53% control, but they'd have 7 or 8 million customers for sure.
Yes,
and a good bank, dude. Don't get me wrong, a good bank.
Yeah, and good competition.
Yeah, and plenty of competition sitting around them.
Like Macquarie, in particular, has come out of nowhere as a tremendous retail bank.
Yeah, totally. And but still, it's now 5, concentrated in 5 hands, perhaps.
But 5's pretty good for a population of 25 million people.
But it's not
compared
so good.
to.
But do you think it's good though if there's another 22 others who don't really get a look in, like in other 22 banks, building societies, smaller banks, regional banks, etc. But it's sort of is, and then therefore you get pricing oligopolies is effectively what I'm trying to say here. But and I don't want you to reflect on any particular industry, but do you think that is a symptom of Australia and that maybe we're not going to solve Qantas or anything?
It's hard to see how. Well, the problem is there's no simple answer to that. Like, one part of it is the population. You know, a big Australia. People won't like hearing this, but I'm in favour of Australia having high immigration intake, and getting to a much bigger population and building up the urban density of the East Coast. Not the cities necessarily, but all of the other regional cities along the way could be much bigger.
Yep.
But of course, that means that the state governments have to keep up with the infrastructure requirements. But if you import skilled migrants who come here with money, with qualifications, who earn good money and good jobs and pay high taxes, then that should over time work. And then that will solve a lot of the competitive issues in the economy and make it a more dynamic economy, because it's very hard to – you need scale as a business, and you need what we call TAM, total addressable market. Really, the banking sector to have – sort of, as you say, 5 players plus a whole bunch of smaller ones. And sure, they can't get a look in, but they would get a look in, more of a look in. They'd be more sustainable if there were 60 million people in Australia.
Yeah, correct.
And so that's part of the problem. On the airline side, it's a part of the problem, but it's not the whole problem. And the just as big a problem is that Qantas and Jetstar are one company, and to take them on when they've got an established 65% market position is not impossible, but it's close to impossible. Because
so do you think the government should be doing one of the considerations of the recent inquiry into the retailers, the big grocery retailers, was that they should be made or should be encouraged to sell off part of their businesses? Should Qantas be encouraged to sell off Jetstar?
Well, you could encourage them all you like. They're not going to do it. You'd have to be forced to do it.
That's what I mean. Well, forced is probably a better word.
I don't think they should be forced to do it, but put it this way. They should be threatened with it. It should be possible that it could happen. And if that was even hanging over them as a possibility, it would change their behaviour. They would think twice about, how much they drop their prices and threw large numbers of seats into new markets. Things that can be on the borders of anti-competitive versus aggressive. That sort of behaviour would definitely be curtailed.
Can I put this to you, Joe? When it comes to governments encouraging us to change our behaviour, governments encourage us as individuals, consumers and or just individuals, voters, constituents, to change our behaviour. The good example of that is, of course, during COVID. But they encourage us to change our behaviour with the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank encouraged us to stop spending by putting interest rates up.
Sure.
And they have no trouble doing that. And in fact, it's a fundamental of the Australian system. And by the way, global systems, it works everywhere around the world. Mm-hmm. Why is it then governments are nervous about trying to change the behaviour of a corporation like Qantas by saying, listen, you better sell, or if you don't, we'll do something about it. You've got to do something about your behaviour, otherwise we will force you to sell Jetstar, for example.
Well, politicians have experience with trying to tell businesses what to do. They try to tell the miners to pay a mining tax.
Oh, that was a major disaster.
And the miners destroyed the Rudd government.
Yeah, they sure did.
So you take on big business. It's
the lobby.
You take on big business at your own risk. And I think if you chip away at them on the fringes, they might cop it on the chin. They'll complain, they'll lobby, but they won't actually go to war with you. Because ultimately, a big corporation can justify spending tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars on public advertising campaigns, lobbying efforts,
the mining tax,
because it's existential to their profits.
Totally,
but a government can only spend so much, and a political party they're quite poor, and in fact they rely on companies to give them money in donations. So
that old horse called self-interest, which is in every race, emerges again. So it's political self-interest.
Yep.
And so the smart people at the places like those places where they are creating oligopolies, etc., or monopolies and duopolies, the smart people inside those places, they actually, whilst they know their behaviour is maybe not perfect, they also know the behaviour of the people who may well be able to change their behaviour, that is the governments. They know that self-interest. And so maybe this will never be solved.
I have, again, as I say, I have very low expectations of change.
Would you expect an inquiry maybe? A new government picks it up and says, let's have an inquiry.
Absolutely not.
Off the back of Joe's book.
No, they just want it to go away.
Mate, finally, And it's a good read. And I commend anyone who's listening just to go and buy the book. It's a bloody good read. Is it? By the way, did you do the audiobook?
I did. I narrated the audiobook.
How long does it take?
Oof, I think it's 12 hours. So you'd have to.
You did yours quick. I couldn't speak for more than 2 hours. Like I'd have to.
Oh,
stop.
no, I didn't do it in one take. I did it over about 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, it took me 2 weeks or something. And when you're doing it, where you're reading things, go, my God, did I actually write that? Did I say that? You know.
Well, I found it a good way of finding errors. So, like,
but once you publish it, you've got to read what you wrote.
I know it's annoying because you go, that's the wrong word. Or
same as me. I was freaking out because I did my audio about 4 years after, or 3 or 4 years after I wrote the book, and it was some stuff was a little bit out of date. So if you buy my book, and anyway, it's about Joe's book, so don't worry.
No, please cross promote.
Importantly, though, Joe, where to from here, mate? Your book's out. You know, you're batting things back. You know, you're going into Christmas time. We're going to see Joe emerge again next year in journalism.
I hope so. Yeah. Look, I don't have any news to share about that, but
breaking news is always welcome on this show.
And I'm not being coy by any stretch either. But journalism is what I'm good at. Well, some people would disagree, but I don't have any other core skill really. It's what I've been doing for a long time, and I enjoy it most days. So I think, I've been I've been down my rabbit hole for a year now, and I do miss it. And I think I'm leaning towards going back to journalism. But look, I just don't know what that looks like yet. I've just finished the book, and I've been out there talking about it, and now I need to sort of talk to some people about who might be interested in my services, and maybe I'll find nobody is. So
the journalism world has changed. Well, it's not changed. It's sort of morphed into lots of different things. So there could be lots of exciting sort of opportunity for someone like you, because I think people still want to listen to you and or read you, so to speak.
Hope so.
But when I say listen, I mean read what you've got to say.
Yeah.
Perhaps even listen to you verbalize something over a microphone. So I mean, because some people when they launch a book, we know it, you know it, I know it. They're sort of effectively, without saying, announcing a new career or a new business venture or something. And because, the PR people, they say, do a book, establish yourself in the marketplace. So do a book. And I wondered when I found out you were writing the book, I thought, I wonder if Joe's got something, he's trying to do this as a precursor to what he wants to do in the future. Or is this was just
only because I don't have it figured out exactly. But I didn't speak to any PR people about writing the book. I just did it because it was a subject that I felt really passionate about and I had command of. And I felt, this is my big opportunity I've always wanted to be an author. I can tick that box and see how I go. And that was a rewarding experience. But it wasn't sort of some strategy to pump like surprise, big reveal. But I mean, eventually, I'll hopefully have a big reveal, but I don't have it right now, unfortunately.
Well, Joe Aston.
If only.
Joe Aston, so good to have you, mate.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to chat.
It's a great read. Here it is. Go get it. And it's on the front page of every newspaper for the last week and a half, so you better read it. Thanks, Joe.
Mark. Cheers.